So, moving on to Article 19 of the Constitution. Article 19 of the Constitution is about the right to freedom. There are six rights that are attempted to be protected under Article 19. The first is the right to freedom of speech and expression, the right to assemble peacefully without arms, to form association or unions and to move freely across the territory of India, to reside and settle in any part of the country, and last, to practice any profession or to carry any occupation, trade, or business. Originally, the article, Article 19, which talks about right to freedom, had uh, you know seven rights: A, B, C, D, E, F, and then G. F is not existing any longer. It was deleted by the 44th Amendment to the Constitution in 1978. And what was deleted was the right to acquire, hold, and dispose of property, which was also a right to freedom under Article 19(1)(f) was deleted. So currently, these are six rights protected, and please note these are rights of free speech, assembly, association, residence, or to practice any profession or to carry any occupation. These are rights that are to be exercised by the citizens against the state. So the citizens have the right, and the state has the duty and obligation to protect these rights. And these are not necessarily that you can exercise against private individuals or private citizens. So that is something that we have to bear in mind. So when we say citizens, it is also available to shareholders or group of individuals, as the case may be of the class of individuals. But please note, Article 19 freedoms are only for citizens and they are not for foreigners as well. Now, interestingly, these are the rights, these are the freedom, but please note these are not absolute. Article 19(2) talks about reasonable restrictions on some of these rights. Having said this, let us start with the freedom of speech and expression, which is the most important right. And if you notice that the right to express one's views or opinions, belief or conviction freely by word of mouth, writing, printing, or through pictures, or by any other means, whether digital or not digital, is considered as one of the right to freedom of speech and expression. The Supreme Court has held that the freedom of speech and expression may include any of these following subset of rights. First, under the freedom of speech and expression, I have the right to propagate one's view as well as the views of others. I have the freedom of the press under Article 19. I have the freedom of commercial advertisement. I have the freedom of, probably in the interest of national security, look at tapping telephones. I have the right to telecast, and the monopoly of the electronic media can remain with the government. I have the right to call a bandh uh, by a political party or an organization. I have the right to know, which is the fundamental right under the Consumer Education and Research Center versus Union of India. Right to know was held to be a fundamental right, even before right to information became a statutory right in 2005. I have the freedom of remaining silent. If the freedom of speech and expression is a positive connotation. The negative reading of the same is to remain silent. Imposition of pre-censorship on newspaper uh, cannot be done. Censorship is not permitted. That is part of the freedom of speech and expression. And the right of demonstration or picketing, but not right to strike. So, right to strike is not part of Article 19 unless it is a legal strike as declared under the Industry Dispute Act. Now, please note the reasonable restrictions on Article 19. So, these are the subset of the right to freedom of speech and expression. I can repeat what is there as a part of your freedom of speech and expression. First, right to propagate one's view, freedom of the press, freedom of commercial advertisement, tapping of telephone, right to telecast, right to call a bandh, right to demonstrate or picket, right against imposition of pre-censorship, freedom of silence, right to know. These are some of the subsets of rights that have been evolved over a period of time through various decisions of the court to mean what does freedom of speech and expression actually mean. Now, under Article 19(2), the reasonable restrictions on a freedom of speech and expression can be on the grounds of sovereignty of the state, security of the state, integrity of India, friendly relationship with foreign states, public order, decency or morality, contempt of court, defamation, and finally, incitement of an offense. You will notice these are quite similar restrictions there under the Right to Information Act 2005, especially under Section 81A, which says that you have the right to information except on some of these grounds when the information can be denied. So, in the Indian Express newspaper versus Union of India in 1985, the Supreme Court said that the Constitution ensures the right of the freedom of the press. However, to maintain equity of the distribution of newsprint or newspaper or any other part of what is required for the press to be utilized, some kind of restriction may be imposed by what is known as the Newsprint Control Order of 1959. These were times when there was shortage of raw material in the state, and hence to see that every press gets equitable distribution of those resources of newsprint, this order was enacted. It was challenged by Indian Express as being violating of freedom of speech and expression, but the court did find the balancing of interest because they said the ownership and control of material resources of the state or the community should be done so as to serve the common good of every individual. So it is the greatest happiness of the greatest number. And hence, please note, reasonable restrictions are sometimes necessitated by the security of the state, and hence the newspaper control order was fine, is what the court had to say. Similarly, if you talk about the freedom of assembly, we say you can assemble, but you should assemble peacefully, and that is the condition, and without arms. So, can you hold peaceful meetings, peaceful demonstrations under this kind of right? Can you take peaceful processions out? Yes, you can do so. This is part of the freedom of right to assemble peacefully and without arms. However, please note that here is where you will try and understand the right to hold public meetings, demonstrations, and processions are only on public land. So you cannot go to a private land and start exercising this kind of rights. And please note, unarmed is a very important precondition of exercising this kind of a right. So there is no provision in the Constitution to protest in violence. There is no provision to allow disorderly nature of riots to take place. And once there is a breach of public peace or order, or if anyone in the gathering who has come to the assembly carries any kind of an arm, then this right is taken off. The state can definitely impose reasonable restrictions on the right to assemble peacefully. Uh, they ought to allow you to take this sometimes because public order has to be maintained, security has to be maintained, and hence under Section 144 of the Criminal Procedure Code 1973, a magistrate can restrain the assembly of individuals. He can pass an order saying that no longer this assembly is legal. From here on, the assembly is considered to be illegal, and if you don't disperse, you will be subject to law and order sanctions. So, please note, while you exercise the right of assembling peacefully, you cannot risk obstruction of someone else's right. You cannot annoy or danger human life of others who are not part of that kind of an assembly or any other thing. Your right for peaceful assembly must not result in injury or safety or any risk of safety or disturbance to other communities. And there should not be any infringement of public tranquility. So, health and safety of all individual concerns in the society has to be maintained if you're exercising the right to peaceful assembly. Under Section 141 of the Indian Penal Code, you will notice that an assembly of 5 or more persons may become unlawful if the object of such kind of an assembly is to resist the execution of any law or to resist the execution of any legal process. It could be summons or court notices or any other thing. So, if you are going to resist the execution of legal process or law, then you could be declared as to be an unlawful assembly. If you are forcefully occupying any kind of a property of any individual or any person, this is forceful occupation. It is an illegal occupation. It's an unauthorized occupation. Then under Section 141, your assembly could be declared unlawful. If you are to commit a mischief or criminal trespass, then under section 141 of the IPC, the orders can be passed. If you are forcing someone to do an illegal act, again, and restraining order can be imposed against you from committing that unlawful act as well. If you decide to threaten any government officer who is exercising his official lawful duty, then also under section 141 of the Indian Penal Code, an assembly of 5 or more persons may become unlawful. So, threatening the government official in the exercise of his lawful powers to force someone to do an illegal or unlawful act, to commit any mischief or criminal trespass, to forcefully occupy someone else's property, and finally to resist the execution of any law or legal process. The assembly that so called was even peaceful can be considered to be unlawful. Right? So, that is what is there part of Article 19(1)(b).